Hey everyone, this is Matthew, aka Sentient Number 6. I've had a few friends ask me in the past few weeks how I make my bass lines, my bass sounds rather, and I just thought I'd make a quick video kind of walking you through a patch that I've made. So this is what it sounds like. So yeah, it's a nice rumbly Darkpsy bass using Serum for this patch, and I'll actually take off all the processing for the start of this. So yeah, check it out. I'm using the note B0 for this bass line. This is pretty important, I think. Like the pitch of your bass is definitely going to determine a lot of the character as well. So typically I'll use like anywhere between like G sharp and C sharp with this technique, or I guess sound design process, I should say. Any lower than G sharp, I mean, I'll still make tracks with G and F sharp and even F sometimes, but the lower you get, I feel like the harder time I have handling like the low mids and the muddiness in the low end as well. So yeah, here's the Serum patch, and I'll be uploading this patch as well in case anyone wants to download it and like reverse engineer what I'm doing here. So yeah, basically the concept is that the main character of the bass sound is being created by these two oscillator A and B, and I'm actually bringing both of them down an extra octave. So this is like a B-1 pitch for both of these, and that sounds pretty. It's low, it's dark. There's not a whole lot of like definition in the low end by itself, just because it's so low that most of the energy is like below where you want your bass to actually be punching. And so to compensate for that, I'm using the sub oscillator. I'm using a parabola waveform. I mean, it sounds just as fine with a sine wave. Triangle wave works just as well. This is just a choice really that you can make. And so basically I'm blending these two oscillators in the sub to create the spectrum, the harmonic spectrum that I want for the bass sound. So always with Serum and any synth that you're using for your bass, really, you want to make sure that there's no random phase. Bring these two knobs all the way to 0 so that every time your bass hits, it's starting at the same point in the cycle of the waveform. And then I'd spend a lot of time trying to find the right combination of phase starting points on each of these oscillators, because changing the phase of these two waveforms is going to drastically shape the transient, the attack of the bass. And yeah, it's really a process of just experimenting and finding. Sometimes I'll use warping to shape both oscillators. In this case, I'm just using this bend plus minus warping to shape this triangle wave a bit more. This is all just kind of like choices that you'll make. I like to do it this way, even if it takes longer, just so that I'm not making or using the exact same bass sound every single time I'm making a track. So yeah, I'm using an 18 dB per octave low pass filter for this one. Sometimes I'll use 24, sometimes I'll go to 12. It just kind of depends on how much high end, how much upper harmonics you want in your bass. I'm always using a little bit of drive, a little bit of fat on the Serum filters. I like to keep the resonance at 0. Not a whole lot else to say about the oscillators and the filter. So my amp envelope, I tend to leave it all the way open, the attack all the way at 0, the sustain all the way up, and the release as low as I can get it without having clicks at the end of each note. So that's what I'm talking about, right? Like, it's all clicky and it doesn't sound tight. So let's bring it back to where I had it. Standard, envelope 2 going to the filter cutoff. I like to leave a tiny bit of attack in the filter envelope, just because if you bring it all the way down, you get like that kind of high-end click, and so just giving it a tiny bit of attack will mitigate that. And yeah, the sustain and the decay are going to shape a lot of the character of your bass. Leaving the sustain all the way up, right, you're going to have a lot more high-end, a lot more upper harmonics. But if you bring it too low, then the bass is too rumbly. It's not going to have a whole lot of definition in the lower mids, and it's not really going to shine through when you have a bunch of leads and atmospheres and stuff in your track over top of it. So I like to find kind of like a sweet spot where I'm still hearing enough mid-range and upper harmonics, but it still sounds low and rumbly. I like to keep the decay pretty tight. If I leave it too open, right, the filter is going to stay open longer, and it's going to sound, not as tight, a bit, just not what I'm looking for. So I think I had it like right around here. And then yeah, like determining how high you want the envelope to take the filter. Just doing this to taste really how much high end, how much click you want in the bass sound. Now, the effects section, I'm not doing a whole lot, it's just a notch filter. But one thing that I think helps a lot with this is to use the note tracking modulator in Serum, because when you change notes, right, if you're writing a track and using different notes for the bass line at different sections, if you leave the notch filter in the same place, it's not always going to be affecting the same harmonics. So by adding the note tracking in Serum, it lets the cutoff of the notch filter follow the notes that you're using in the bass line. The resonance is just to taste, because it's a 24 dB per octave notch. It's a bit more drastic, and so having some resonance will kind of make that notch a bit more narrow, not take out so much in the spectrum. Just a tiny bit more drive, tiny bit more fat, and I'm blending in the dry signal, because without the filter, right, it's very, very mid-rangey, very kind of throaty sounding. So I like to dial in the mix, just how I hear it. It's just like just to taste. So yeah, that pretty much does it for the patch itself. And let's go to the plugins. So really, it's really simple. Like, I just distort and EQ essentially. I don't like to use compression. I don't like to sidechain. I guess I should mention that I've mapped the velocity to the amp, the global amp in Serum, just so that I can control the dynamic of each bass note with the velocities in the piano roll. And I find that for me, this gives me a bit more control than sidechain compression with the kick and bass. Especially because when I make my kicks, I only make them as long as 1/16th note for the track that they're in, so that I know that the tail of the kick isn't going to be overlapping with this first bass note, and so I can just use the velocity in the piano roll to get the groove that I'm looking for. So the plugins I'm using this SPL Twin Tube. This is essentially just like a nice analog modeled distortion and harmonics saturator. Yeah, it's really just kind of filling in a bit more space in the spectrum, adding in some more harmonics, just some nice color. This Filterfreak, this is like one of my favorite tricks for bass design. Essentially, the idea is that I'm using a bandpass filter. If I turn the mix all the way back up, you can hear that it's just the click, right? I'm finding a frequency that I want to emphasize. In this case, I'm trying to emphasize a bit more of that high-end click, and then I use the distortion in the filter to bring out those harmonics a bit more. And then what I do is just dial it back with the mix knobs so that I have, just the right amount of that click. Yeah. So after that, it's just some EQ. I'm not really using any hard and fast rules with the EQ. This is all to taste, case-by-case basis. I do like to use a low shelf instead of a high-pass filter to take out the ultra lows, because because we're using that -1 octave on both of the main oscillators in Serum. There's a ton of energy like below 30 hertz that you really don't need, because the main fundamental for the sound, right, is this note B, 61.735 hertz. So this is really what's going to be coming through. This is going to be like what you want to be, like the fundamental frequency. And so filtering out all this ultra low is going to give you more headroom. It's going to sound cleaner, tighter on a sub. And yeah, this is just shaping the mid-range. This band is taking out some mud. This band is kind of re-emphasizing those frequencies that I removed with the notch filter and Serum, and kind of emphasizing again like the distortion I added with the twin tube. Just a little bit more high-end click with the EQ. Not a whole lot to say about it. This is again just like case-by-case EQing. And then this plugin is just adding a bit more distortion. Again, this is, it's not like an absolute necessity to add more distortion after you EQ. It's just like, I got this plugin recently. It's fancy, and it's just again more like analog tube modeling, just to give a bit more color, a bit more dirt to the bass. So yeah, altogether, the kick sounds like this. One thing I like to double check is using the utility plugin. Using this bass mono feature, right, it's going to make sure that everything below this frequency is in mono, which, it should already be in mono just because I didn't add any stereo processing in either the kick or bass, so it's mono anyways. But using this little headphone light here will make it so you can only hear below this frequency, and it kind of lets me pretend that I'm hearing it on like a subwoofer, and you kind of hearing it, having heard psytrance, right, on a big system before, you can kind of get a sense of how the kick and bass pulse with one another. And so for me, this is kind of like a test that I use to make sure that the kick and bass have the right amount of bump and groove with each other. And yeah, other than that, just mixing them together. I like to aim for somewhere between 1 to 2 dB between the kick and bass. I always want the kick, 1 to 2 dB louder than the bass, just so it punches through. Yeah, that's pretty much it as far as my process of making bass. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments or send me a message or anything. And yeah, again, I'll be uploading this Serum Patch in case anyone wants to download it, use it, reverse engineer it, or whatever. So yeah, thanks for watching all the way to the end if you've made it this far. Going to be making more videos in the future. So yeah, I'll see you next time.